Welcome back. You're in the Politbureau. The DA unveiled a controversial banner this week in Johannesburg titled "The ANC is Killing Us." It lists the names of South Africans who lost their lives in pit toilets and during the Life Esidimeni and Marikana tragedies. The poster didn't last long, though. A day later, people claiming to be family members of some Esidimeni victims, claiming to be the family of some Esidimeni victims, tore down the banner, attempted to tear the poster down, rather, in inner city Johannesburg.
We've only got one job, which is to make sure all the people who are involved in murdering our people will be prosecuted. And I want you to know, now will not rest until this government is held to account.
What this billboard does is to reproduce information that has been in the public public domain for a long time. It hasn't done anything extraordinary to infringe the privacy of the families or the individuals.
So, is the DA on point or tone deaf? Joining us in studio alongside Imran Fakir and Andy Rice is Mahashila Ghana of the DA. Let me start off with you, Mr. Ghana. Why do you and still continue, why do you think and still continue to do so that this was a good idea?
Thanks very much, Nicholas, and good morning to the viewers. I must say that the intention that we had as the DA was never to hurt the families of Marikana or Life Esidimeni. You know, this is something that we wanted to highlight in terms of the uncaring nature of the ANC government in South Africa. And if our billboard has hurt the families, we want to apologize and say that we did not intend any malice. You know, this was an honest mistake. And having interacted with the families before, as you might know, that last year on the 21st of March, we did put a plaque at the Talisman Foundation highlighting the untimely death of the Life Esidimeni patients, and also the work that we've been doing with the Marikana Fund. So this was never intended to cause any harm to the families. And for the harm that has been caused to the families, we want to apologize for that. But then we will continue to point out that what the ANC has been doing, it's literally to kill South Africans, deliberately so.
We'll get to you in a moment to ask you whether or not that's an official retraction of this advert and that message. But let's bring in Brand Guru and Andy Rice. What does this say about the DA and their branding? I mean, does this indicate a party that's not in touch with what South African society is about?
Well, I certainly think it may indicate a party that doesn't have sufficient controls in the process of developing communication pieces like this. I think there's a big difference between strategy and execution that applies here. So strategically, was it a good idea for the DA to highlight deficiencies in the government's initiatives in the various areas that were included, in health and in labour? Probably fine to alert them, because that is an area of their weakness, and they must be aware of that. Was it a good execution to use the names of all of the victims without consulting the families to do so? Almost certainly not. So a good idea strategically can become a real liability executionally.
Ibrahim, the DA has been accused of sabotaging itself unprovoked. Is this another case?
I think so. I mean, I must start off by apologizing. I realized I wore the wrong color blazer.
No need to apologize, blue is the color.
But look, the reality is, I mean, you know, the way in which it was executed was completely unseemly. The reality is this is not a public memorializing of what happened. So, for instance, if you're memorializing the Rwandan genocide, you wouldn't necessarily go about doing it in the way in which a private political party, for unseemly campaign purposes, for private purposes, for the contest of power, would actually do so. There are more creative ways in which it could have done. So strategically, I think Mr. Rice is correct. It's the right approach. But tactically, it went completely awry because it didn't follow internal, not just controls, but a workshopping of the ideas of how is this going to, in fact, land with the people who we intend this message to go to. And therefore, it does come across as insincere. Now, is this self-sabotage? Yes, but the ANC doesn't have grounds to complain here for two reasons. A, is that the Electoral Code of Conduct strictly only applies once an election has been proclaimed, and it hasn't yet been proclaimed. So we don't, so, you know, they're going to make a meal of it, obviously, and they would be stupid not to, because I think the DA did mess up on this particular instance, not strategically, not on the point that they are trying to make, but the way in which they go about making the point.
So is this an official retraction on your part? I mean, you're apologizing to anybody that was offended, but I don't see the EA coming out and putting in another poster.
We, as I said earlier, that the families have come out and to say that they've been hurt by the billboard, and we are engaging with the families in the same way that we've always worked with the families, especially the families of Life Esidimeni. I've mentioned the plaque that we had put in memorial. The work that in the legislature we've been doing to ensure that there is compensation for the families, and also following up on the 21 missing patients that are still not being found.
I understand it, Mr. Gunner, but is there a firm commitment to take down that banner and replace it as soon as possible? Because to my mind, it's still sitting up there half vandalized. The poster and the message that it seeks to communicate insofar as the uncaring nature of the ANC, that the ANC is starting to behave in the manner that apartheid South Africa behaved when it killed its own people. The poster for the time being will remain up, and the party leadership will make a decision on when the poster will be going down. But as I said, we will continue to put the message, because factually, no one can argue with a statement that the ANC has killed people in Marikana, that it is an ANC government that has killed the 144 patients in Life Esidimeni. So the fact of the matter remains that the ANC is killing us and is indeed killing South Africa. So what does it say about their branding going forward? Have they not learned from this lesson then, Andy, if the banner is going to continue to stay up, even half vandalized?
I think the story is so widespread that whether it stays up or not is no longer the same risk it might have been a few days ago. But I do think it's a good example of the double-edged sword nature of political advertising. So here we have an example of the negative publicity almost certainly being greater than the positive message that originated it. And there is also some evidence that people respond to criticism with a degree of sympathy for the criticized party, regardless of their own particular affiliation. So it happens occasionally, and there's a risk that it would have happened here, that by taking this rigorous stance against a competitor, the market's response is to say, well, that's unfair, that's going too far, and now my sympathies are slightly increased in the direction of the aggrieved party.
Ibrahim Fakir, the EFF leader Julius Malema got thrown out of Parliament very early on in the Red Berets' first 10 years MPs with this exact thing. I mean, highlighting the fact that the ANC government, and he said it, you can go back and read it on Hansard, is guilty of killing the people at Marikana. He was thrown out alongside his party, and the message didn't come across as it was a party that was being insensitive to the deaths of those people. What's the difference here, and how and why is it not the same for the Reds and the Blues?
Well, it ought to be the same if we are not operating in the institutional domain, because there's a completely different set of rules which in fact apply in Parliament, where things have to be factually backed up, there has to be some evidence, and it has to be clear and precise communication in terms of what you are saying. Of course, in Parliament, MPs have greater latitude to be able to say certain things because they have parliamentary privilege and parliamentary immunity. In the era of campaigning, which is where this billboard now falls in, right? Even though the Electoral Code of Conduct doesn't yet apply, the latitude is as great to be able to say certain things, even though they may not be actually factually correct. So in this DA slogan, which says the ANC is killing people, it's not the ANC. The ANC doesn't have agency. It's the ANC in government which has done so. So in terms of political communication, it would make sense because you would also allow a greater latitude, as previous complaints to the electoral courts and elsewhere have shown, that their findings are that you must provide as wide a space as possible in allowing for free speech and for vigorous campaigning.
Mr. Ghana, maybe a final word from you on this matter. Why is the DA not trumpeting its successes in places like Pretoria, in places like Johannesburg, and in places like the city of Johannesburg, the city of Cape Town, rather, and Nelson Mandela Bay when you did govern there? Some may argue that you're actually guilty of negative campaign.
Nicholas, and I must first go against what Ibrahim has said. You know, the ANC cannot stand up and say and claim, for instance, that it has delivered so many houses, it has built so many clinics, so many schools, but then when it comes to the killing of the people in Marikana and Life Esidimeni, then it must wash its hands off and say that it's not the ANC. Because the statement that Ibrahim says is that no political party can claim, for instance.
Mr. But I can't dispute that, but I want to know from you, why is the DA not trumpeting its successes in places it has governed?
The campaign hasn't rolled out. The billboard was in memory of the lives that we have lost as a result of an uncaring government. Once our campaign rolls out, you'll see the positive difference that the DA government has made in Johannesburg, in Tshwane, in Midvaal, in the Western Cape, in other areas where the DA governs. So this billboard was in memory of the lives that we have lost as a result of an uncaring ANC government.
Andy Rice, final word from you. Negative campaigning. I mean, are we going to see a change in the approach by parties like the DA, by opposition parties essentially calling out the faults of the governing ANC, or is it in a certain aspect a winning formula?
There is a role for negative campaigning in politics. It does work, provided it's treated properly and people understand the negative possibilities. I do think, however, that all parties, but the DA would be certainly one of them, are guilty of not providing enough positive information. I mean, we see the same thing with Brexit in the UK. Labour is coming under increased criticism because they don't have a plan to counter the one they're criticising. And I think the same applies here.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on the Politbureau. Coming up next, spinners and spanners. Donald Trump's bad spelling and grammar may just be making America great again.